I'll give just a very quick introduction. I'm Charlie Cogbill. I am from Plainfield, Vermont. I am a freelance ecologist, although I have associations with a bunch of places, including Harvard Forest, Hubbard Brook, and the Paleon, which is an NSF-funded research group that's working on historical ecology. I have several different foots in the field. I have a lot of theoretical. I was trained as a plant ecologist. Cut my eye teeth working in the boreal forests of eastern Canada in Quebec, and kind of imbued with theoretical ecology. I've always been a natural historian, interested in just what's there and whether it's birding or tree distributions, just getting out in the woods and seeing what's there. And for the past 30 years, I've been a historical ecologist, working in the archives, which I call two tracks of what was there. You can ask the trees what was there through tree rings or through historical documents or surveys, or you can ask the people that were actually there 200 years ago what they saw. So that's kind of three different interests, and today I'm going to be addressing all three of those toward an essential question, which is what was the forest like in Vermont, or even more specifically here, before Euro-American settlement and then massive changes. First of all, any guesses? What was the dominant tree here? If we looked out the window, actually, we could look out three windows here. We could look back toward the village and look at the floodplain of the Ottaquechee. We can look northward onto Mount Tom. Or we could look westward, kind of up into the surrounding hills. What was the dominant tree here in 1761?
Pine.
Pine, okay, that's on my list. I've got 6 on my list here. Pine, yeah.
Hemlock.
Hemlock, all right.
Beech.
Hemlock, beech.
Oak.
Oak. I got 2 more. Maple, what kind of maple?
Oak. Red.
Okay, you say red. Actually, if you look today, it probably is red maple. But I said in 1761, right. Yeah. I've got 1 more tree on the list.
Elm.
Well, that wasn't my list, but I will leave it at there.
Pine or hardwood?
Either. Okay. You say hardwood, or you say softwood. Yeah, you covered the gamut there. I had birch. Just for. Okay.
You mean yellow birch, right?
I don't know what I mean. I could mean gray birch. You get into any of the old fields around here, there's an awful lot of gray birch. There's a lot of yellow birch in the woods, although if you go further north, there's much more yellow birch. Notice I'm talking biogeography, I'm talking history, and I'm talking data. The dominant tree. And today I hope to see that there are at least 3 different ways to approach the question of the original forest. You can approach it in theory, all right? See what other people say should have been there. A lot of that speculation. This is the Harvard Forest model in the Fisher Museum. This is the pre-colonial forest. In 1936, Harvard was given the last virgin tract in New Hampshire in Winchester called the Harvard Tract. Unfortunately, in 1938, it all blew down, and Harvard lost the last virgin tract in New England. However, they recreated it in a diorama, and they recreate it with maple, beech, way back there's a birch, hemlock, and white pine. All of those species, and kind of getting the structure there of size. This is their idea, trying to reconstruct the Harvard Tract. in southwestern New Hampshire that was blown down. By the way, when it was blown down, it was really neat because they went in, they measured the trees, and they could just figure out how old they were, and they've been following it for the past 80 years to see what has happened afterwards, to see what has come back. All right, we can look at that. We can also look in the field. That is, go out and look at actual forests today. This is Lord's Hill in Marshfield, Vermont. This is the booklet that the Vermont Natural Resource Council published on the old growth forests of Vermont. And you can see the tree there and the tree there are the same tree. However, they reverse the negative on the old growth of Vermont. So this is looking from the inside out, and this is looking from the outside in to the forest. I think they thought it looked nicer reversed, if you can make old growth forests look nice.
Excuse me, is that slide on the left, is that colonial or?
This is called, the label on that is the pre-colonial forest. By the way, I have a thesaurus of 50 adjectives. Primeval, pristine, original, old growth, virgin, any foresters, decadent.
And what is that hardwood then?
This is a mixed wood stand. There's some white pine, there's some...
The large tree.
Oh, this here? This is sugar maple and that's sugar maple. Or actually, this is a sugar maple, and that's made out of copper. It's a diorama. It's not it's a maple, a sugar maple. Although, we'll get to the point, the pre-colonial forests of New England had absolutely no sugar maples whatsoever in it because that isn't the name they used for it. I'll show you later. Yeah.
Charlie, what about the Native Americans and how they might have affected that forest?
Okay. I have been put over the coals of calling it the pre-settlement forests. And that, where you put the hyphen on pre-settlement really changes things. I am not addressing Native Americans. For the most part, the Native Americans were here before the forest was. Literally, the Paleo-Indians came through before forests established after the glaciers left. So this area has been more human involved than it has been forested, and they have affected the forest. However, the most knowledgeable person about this was Gordon. What's his first name? Gordon Day. Okay. Gordon Day, who got a forestry degree from Syracuse and was a forester, and then in his later career became an ethnologist, the last speaker of Abenaki, wrote the Abenaki Dictionary, was the anthropologist at the Museum of Man in Canada. So this is a forester and an Abenaki ethnologist who's wrote a paper in the 50s called The Effect of Indians on the Forests of New England. And basically says, yes, they had an effect, but in the uplands, away from settlements or fishing places or whatever, the effect was benign, was undetectable. And I'll stick by that. So I start at what I call pre-settlement, which is when original English surveyors came through. What was there before is the original forest. It had natives in it. The natives had an effect on it. Not the effect that you read about in Cronin's Changes in the Land, which is a wonderful book about southern New England. He has actually a footnote on page 146, I think it is, that says that this applies to southern New England, but the title of the book and everything else implies that it's all of New England. And he talks about agricultural natives and the effect of using fire to clear and hunt deer and all sorts of things that happened in southern New England. It really didn't happen up here according to Day. Okay, there's my native lecture. Okay, so in the field you can find these stands. They go by many names. I just like to, I call them reference stands that haven't been recently affected by human disturbance. And finally in the archives, and this is my bread and butter of really trying to find out actual empirical data about what was here when the first surveyors or the first settlers came through. Okay, we can go to several different stories. This is Ira Allen. He owned 8 townships, the Onion River townships along the Winooski River with his brothers. And he also thought himself as a surveyor. Actually, he apprenticed for one day. And then the next day called himself a surveyor, and the next week or so actually had a prospectus to write a treatise on surveying. It was fairly simple, but you can see here in his autobiography he talked about the town of Mansfield. It doesn't exist anymore because it's half in Stowe and half in Underhill. It's an old town that's been split. He was the owner and the surveyor, owner as a proprietor with a group of other people, were given this 6-mile by 6-mile township. And he surveyed and he said, a difficulty arose to my mind, for the object was to sell. Man, he was a developer from Connecticut. It's a real metaphor for Vermont history. And if possible, get 90 pounds for the survey. A great proportion of the corners on said lots were spruce or fir timber. There's Mount Mansfield. In an image from the 1800s. And if I described them, it would show the poorness of the town. In my survey bills, I call it spruce and fir gumwood, a name not known to the people of Sharon, Connecticut, who were the other owners of the town. And he brags about going and beating up this town and then trying to sell out to these unworthy, unsuspecting people in Sharon. Unfortunately, this is the actual return of survey that Ira returned, and you can see it was 64% beech, all right, the predominant beech, 18% spruce. Allen said he called it gumwood, but in his actual return, he calls it spruce. Ira Allen, bragging in his autobiography about lying, was lying. Okay. I'd like to give this talk at the University of Vermont. He founded the University of Vermont, and his statue's out there, and I can talk about his personality. It isn't defamatory because he's now dead.
Is that white spruce?
No, this is red spruce, almost all. My best guess, or educated guess. And we also had maple, birch, and hemlock, which are 5 out of the 6 species. We're missing pine. Who had pine? Okay, hold it for a second. All right, so we have, this is very anecdotal. It tells you only about one place, and it tells you only about one survey of a person that was a lying, uneducated surveyor. We can start off with real theory. This is Illusi Brown. She's the queen of the eastern forest. In the 1920s through 50s, she roamed around. She was the first female graduate, PhD at the University of Cincinnati. She loved the deciduous forests, especially her beloved Cumberlands, which had deciduous forests with lots of different species, very diverse forests, very large forests. And she drove around in her Model T Ford with her sister Annette is scale, and drove up into the back hollows of the southern mountains and said, "Can I look at your woods?" You'd think what would happen if a guy drove up in a sports car with a big degree from a university saying, "Could I look at your woods in the back hollows of Kentucky?" It never would have happened. She got there, and she visited all of the places in the South, and finally, for her book, The Deciduous Forests of Eastern North America, she decided to expand the area to where deciduous forests grow. And this line divides the southern oak-type forests from the northern forest that she calls the hemlock, white pine, hardwoods forest. And to quantify that, she made one trip where she visited 2 places in western Pennsylvania, 1 place in northern New York, which is actually the ranger school at SUNY Syracuse, and spent 2 days at Gifford Woods. Gifford Woods is right up where Route 4 and Route 100 come together, now the town of Killington. There's the state park, and there's it was a state park at the time that she visited in 1946. She went in and she used the Brown sampling technique, which is she walked into the woods and the first 100 trees of any size that she saw, she tallied to get the composition. And of that forest, she called it the hemlock, white pine, northern hardwoods. The predominant tree in her sample was sugar maple, followed by beech, followed by birch, with only one hemlock. The hemlock tree is still there. This is right down near Kent Pond. That's the only hemlock tree in this place, which is the icon of New England's northern hardwood forests. This was described originally by Brown in the book, and it is the basis of what we think of as northern hardwoods. This stand was later sampled by Borman and Buell in the late 50s. To give it more than 100 trees, they measured up the stand, and it was still dominated by very large sugar maples, followed by beech, followed by birch, still had one hemlock in the stand, and it actually had one basswood that's all fallen down that was right beside the hemlock, and at that time, one elm. Somebody said elm. That was over, but that elm was dead by the 60s, so that's gone. But Brown generalized. She generalized that the boundaries of the hemlock white pine northern is a region ill-defined for the great tension zone between encroaching southern, she's got the big picture, look at that, encroaching southern species and retreating more northern species. The southern species are the northern hardwoods, beech, birch, and maple, maybe basswood and elm. The northern species are spruce, fir. I don't know if hemlock and white pine count as a northern species or a southern species. They're actually right in between. They're a temperate conifer species. But so she says here it's ill-defined because it's a tension zone, retreating north. But then she says it's a region of interpenetrating climaxes. This is grand ecological theory. It harks back to the 1920s when climax was thought of as what would develop in an area if, just by knowing the climate, without any disturbance, what would develop in this area. And they came up with it would be hemlock, white pine, northern hardwoods. It's a grand prediction. But it's a region distinct. She was a little bit confused about things. It was ill-defined and it was distinct, and it had hemlock in it and no white pine, or though, well, whatever. That's what theory is all about. We can bring these all together. We can look at remnants. This is the Cape Research Natural Area, not Cape Cod. This is in the Green Mountain National Forest on the Chittenden-Goshen town line, Addison-Rutland County line. It's on the western-facing Green Mountain front. It's filled with enriched species, very large there. We can look at the current vegetation. This is the vegetation just southwest of the Pogue in Woodstock at the Marsh, Billings, Rockefeller, it's too long, National Historic Site. We just, MBR, I don't know what we call here. But this is a forest of sugar maple, a beech, a little bit of birch back there, which is the current vegetation. And we can look at anecdotal data. Anecdotal data is just one site, one time. But in 1778, the outlines of the town of Hartford were surveyed, the outlines of the town. And from the southwest corner of Hartford, which is the southeast corner of Woodstock, which was marked in 1771 by a surveyor, marked the corner, and then said the timber was mostly beech. Oh, nice. Thence he went north-northeast on the town line. At 1 mile marked a maple, 2nd mile marked a maple, 3rd mile marked a beech, and 4th mile marked a beetlewood. Now, this is one of the major conclusions of this afternoon. What was beetlewood? Okay, well, we know where the location is. It's right between Garvin Hill and, which is in Hartford, and Bailey's Hill, which is in Woodstock, on the town line that's still there. It's exactly 4 miles north on the town line. We could go to that spot, or you could go to that spot and see what beetlewood is. Now, beetlewood also shows up in other early surveys. It's the name for black gum in Martha's Vineyard or southeastern Massachusetts, where they have beetle gum or beetle balm. Gum tree. Gum is tupelo or black gum or pepperidge. You've all heard of Pepperidge Farm? Have you ever seen the logo of Pepperidge Farm? Oh, come on, buy the bread and look at the logo. It's a mill with a sugar maple beside it. The people that developed that logo for Pepperidge Farm didn't know what they were talking about. Pepperidge is the old southern New England name for gum. I think that this very likely, because it's also a beetlewood, this way is spelled like the beetle, that's the insect, even though beetlewood in Martha's Vineyard spelled like the beetles, to beat. So you used it as a maul or a hammer. Be that as it may, just keep that in mind of beetlewood and what beetlewood might be. But that's very typical of early surveys. They use names that we're not used to. But they're very informative because they can tell us what was there.
I have to tell you, I've researched the records in Barnard, and the surveyor there marked terebinth.
Okay.
Terebinth tree.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to get to that or if you know what it is.
No, I'm going to get to Riemann.
Okay.
Okay, you saw any Riemanns?
Okay. No, this surveyor was Prince Haskell. But anyway.
Okay, I'll talk to you later. This is, it's another one of my things is collecting old survey, especially old survey names, and you'll see. But you put that together and you get a synthetic map where we have northern areas that have a mixture of conifers, temperate conifers and hardwoods. We have an area in between, the red here, which is northern hardwoods. We have the brown here, which is transition forest, a mixture of northern hardwoods with a little southern influence, and then we have these southern, which are sprout hardwoods, oaks, hickories, and used to be chestnuts. But we can put that together and we can predict what was growing here. It's brown. Brown. Transition northern hardwoods. So, good prediction, good speculation of what might have been here.
Are you pretty happy with that map, Charlie?
At this scale, it's an acceptable map. I will show you, no, I'm not happy with it because it isn't based on empirical data. It's based on expert opinion. And the expert opinion is things like Hugh Raup took one trip from Harvard down to Storrs, Connecticut, saw where white pine gave out and where white pine picked up, and that's that big nose there, is a 10-minute drive by Hugh Raup in the 1940s. Great anecdotal data, but it's a little bit generalized. And this is just another map. This is Cutlers Map of potential natural vegetation. It's the same exact map for New England, by the way. They just recoded it. We have mixed spruce hardwoods in the north. We have northern hardwoods, beech, birch, and maple. Maple is sugar maple. Birch is yellow birch growing here, and you could extend it down further south. And then we have oaks and hickories growing down on the coastal region. By the way, this is Lord's Hill. It's part of the Vermont State Forest, Groton State Forest. It's a fragile area. It's been set aside, and about 800 trees have had tags on them and have been followed for the past, since 1977. What does that make it? Close to 45 years.
Where's Lord's Hill?
Lord's Hill's in Marshfield, right off of Route 2, right next to Devil's Hill. And right between them is the old town of Jerusalem. Devil's Hill, Lord's Hill, Jerusalem. We're still trying to, still trying to figure that out. Okay. This is just a look at some of those patterns that we have. This is a field, I love it, right on Interstate 91 in Norwich. There's a sugar maple growing right next to an oak. So there's the transition zone between Illusi Browns, the northern, or the oaks going north, and sugar maples coming south. And this is a metaphor for climate change. You've heard about the oak army? The oak army with climate change, it's getting warmer, so the oaks are moving north. It's like the Ents, if you're into Tolkien. Here's a more a stark view of it. This is Mount Ascutney, the south slope, and there are the oaks growing on the south slope, and there are the temperate conifers. This is red spruce, and there's the tension zone, which is the northern hardwoods, about 1 tree wide. Right between where the oaks and the northern softwoods come together. And this is, I think, the most famous individual tree in Vermont. It's the Stockbridge sycamore. If you drive Route 107 through Stockbridge, on the left-hand side, right after the school, there's a little valley and there's a sycamore tree. It's a lonely sycamore tree because the nearest other sycamore tree is down in Bethel, downriver about 12 miles. Sycamore came up from the south, came up the Connecticut River Valley, went up the White River Valley. It comes up the Lake George Champlain Valley, cuts into various places in central Vermont, New Haven, the New Haven River, and whatever. But it's been stuck trying to get north. And that was a long time ago that it tried to get north. Are there any sycamores in Woodstock, in the Ottaquechee?
We have a cut leaf maple here is kind of a lonely thing. But
Yeah,
something somebody planted.
Yeah, there are some planting things. You might even have a chestnut that has been planted or whatever. Up in MBR, you have all sorts of European things. Larch and Norway spruce and
Here in Woodstock.
In Woodstock, and I'll call it native Woodstock for lack of a better word. Looking along the river and seeing what's coming up the river, and it's possible that there was originally sycamore, but not anymore. Actually, it was used by the original settlers for utensils and plates and whatever, or for buttons. It's also called buttonwood there. But we do have, odd species, but species that really say something about the history of the site, when they got here and how long ago. Okay, this you'll appreciate. This is what I call the 3 models. After Brown did her map and whatever, northern hardwood forests have been intensively studied for 50 years. At Hubbard Brook over in New Hampshire. And these are the 3, what I call the 3 models of the forest, what the forest was like. There's a book called Pattern and Process in a Forested Ecosystem by Borman and Likens that talks about succession after a clear cut. There's the forest. This is the reference forest. It's called W6, which is a forest that is their reference for what the undisturbed forest should be like. It was originally sampled back in the 60s. R.H. Whitaker described it as equivalent to the old growth. It was the ultimate development of a forest in the 1960s of what we have here. And it is predominantly birch, beech, and a good deal of maple. It's a beech birch maple forest. It's a northern hardwood forest, a typical example. All right? And then there's the third model. This is my holy grail or Eureka movement. In the 1980s, I found this map in the New Hampshire Historical Society, which represents the town that now Hubbard Brook is half in, the town of Peeling that became the town of Woodstock. And it's a map of the individual lots. And at the corner of each lot is written a name: beech, birch, spruce, hemlock, whatever. This circle is Hubbard Brook. And this is the current view with experiments about cutting. Lots going on there. But I want to know, what was Hubbard Brook really? Was it succession after a clear cut? Was it old growth forest? Or was it the forest represented by this map, which shows that, this is the map, 38% spruce, 32% beech, 22% birch, 8% fir, no hemlocks, and no maples. Today, this is the reference watershed: 50% maple, 21% birch, 29% beech. It has changed. The original forest that's Hubbard Brook, that is the reference site for geochemistry and for forest dynamics and for forest floristics, has gone from a mixed spruce with some northern hardwoods in it to a maple-dominated stand with just northern hardwoods. Completely changed. Same species. It hasn't lost any species. It hasn't gained any species, but it's changed its composition. And that's understandable. This is a picture of Hubbard Brook. This is a downburst that happened 5-6 years ago, where winds came through and blew down forests. So it isn't undisturbed. If you look very closely here, this is the canopy. You can see places with little canopies, and you can see places with big canopies. It isn't homogeneous. It isn't all the same size. It doesn't all have the same history. It has a unique, literally unique history of cutting. This is the growth of beech trees starting at about 1900, early 1900s, release because of a logging operation that was done in the valley that removed all the spruce. So it's very easy to know why there's very little spruce here. Then it recovered from that original logging until 1938, when it was again released. The hurricane hit it. It was followed by a salvage cut. And we actually have the numbers of the trees that came out of that salvage cut. And then it's been recovering from the salvage. Here's the growth before any of these disturbances. Here's the growth today. You can see it's changing. It's dynamic. It isn't one predictable, and it certainly isn't climax in the one climate and one predictable end point. Ooh. All right, there's one other way to look at history, and this is the long view of history. This is a pollen diagram. We don't have any right around here, but we do have one up in my area in the Winooski Valley called Nob Hill Pond, a diagram done by people at Harvard Forest. And if you've never seen pollen diagrams before, the bottom of the lake is the top of the diagram. And the bottom of the sediments in the lake is the bottom of the diagram. So as you go down through the sediments, you get older and older. And they take samples out, and then they look at the pollen and see what the species are. This is the last 2,000 years. But if we look at the last 10,000 years, 10,000 years ago, there was a little bit of spruce and a little bit of fir that came in and then went away. That was replaced by pine and birch. Birch here, pine here. And then slowly, starting about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, beech came in. Oak has been in from before then. And where I can't see the maple. Yeah, maple. Maple doesn't produce much pollen. It comes in there. Really interesting here is hemlock. which had major about 6,000 years ago, and then virtually disappeared 5,200 years ago. This is the hemlock decline throughout the range, all throughout eastern North America.
Why?
We don't know. The people that did this diagram claim it's climate setting up other stressors. However, the area that has that decline is filled with the wing segments of hemlock looper. Now, is the hemlock looper the cause or the result? We don't know. But it's a pattern, it's consistent, it's fairly well synchronous throughout eastern North America, and it only took about 4,000 years to recover. As it recovered, it was about 500 years ago. It was fairly, this is more recent, that's 500 years ago. It's been declining since then. Here's, where's spruce? Here's beech is held its own. Here's our birch has held its own. Beech is declining. Beech was much more abundant here 600-700 years ago, and then is declining. And spruce just showed up 2,000 years ago and made about 500 years ago, was very abundant, and then has declined since. Over the long span, species come and go. Not by extinction, but become more abundant or less abundant as time goes on. So that, what we're doing is, in our pre-settlement, we're catching, somewhere in the middle there. What was happening between the maximum expression when the trees first got here, which was definitely not settled, to what happened in pre-settlement times to what happened today. We can look at reference stands. This is not theory, this is empirical data. These are 3 sites that are really good, well-developed stands. They're not very large pieces of property. This is Gifford Woods. It's 5 acres between Route 100 and Kent Pond. Its composition is 77% huge sugar maples. They're 3 to 4 feet in diameter. Yellow birch, beech, no spruce, teeny bit of ash, and there's the one tree, hemlock, down there. This is Lord's Hill, that place in Marshfield, Vermont, dominated by yellow birch with lesser amounts of ash, spruce, and sugar maple. And this is the Cape, that rich slope over in the Green Mountains, which is dominated by sugar maple with lesser amounts of yellow birch and beech. These are all northern hardwood forests going from relatively poor conditions to relatively enriched conditions. Each of these places has flaws. All right, this is Gifford Woods. 15 years ago, the Agency of Transportation did a sampling of the trees, the sugar maple trees along Route 100 to widen it through Gifford Woods. And here's a cookie out of that. And you can see sugar maple with the spile scars. It was a sugar bush. That isn't surprising. There's an old sugar arch in the middle of the stand. But be that as it may, it is the reference site that Illusi Brown went to, that Borman and Buell went to, that if you had to say today, what is the closest old growth stand to where we are here? Without a doubt, it's Gifford Woods. A little bit higher elevation, but a good example. Just remember, it's an old sugar bush. There are lots of old sugar bushes in town and in the towns around, so you can get equal stuff. This is Lord's Hill in Marshfield. You can see the beech trees are decaying because of beech bark disease. This is a stone wall. I like Lord's Hill because it has a stone wall on either side of the old growth. 13 acres, that's to keep the old growth in, or maybe to keep the people out. This is the Cape Research Natural Area, this enriched slope. This is halfway up the slope, which is a piece of barbed wire. This was an old woods pasture. It had cows that were allowed to roam through and and whatever in there. Probably never cut, but that doesn't mean never disturbed by grazing. The one site that really is a reference site is the Bowl Research Natural Area in Wanalancet, New Hampshire, at the southern edge of the White Mountains. This has been the first research natural area set aside by the U.S. Forest Service in their system. It goes from very good hardwoods down below up to spruce up above, so it has an elevational range. Unfortunately, you have to hike in on the Dicey Mill Trail. Mill means something to most people. I think Dicey is equally problematic as you come in. There was a mill in part of this watershed. Also, it was severely hit by the hurricane of 1815, the hurricane of 1938. It's had landslides. It's had fires after the landslides. It's a very good reference site, but it's anything but stable, and it's anything but northern hardwoods. It's a transition of mixed woods from hardwoods at the bottom to pure temperate softwoods at the top. We do have other sites. They come in different compositions, different flavors. This is Camels Hump. From the top, this is where Hub Vogelman was studying forests from the top, and a picture just like this showed up on the front of Natural History magazine called Catastrophe at Camel's Hump, about the spruce decline. Unfortunately, these are all fir trees, and that's a fir wave. So the catastrophe wasn't, well, spruce didn't do very well, but this isn't a picture of the spruce not doing well. Be that as it may, this is a nice, well-developed forest. This is Church Woods in Shelburne Farms. Anyone been to Shelburne Farms in Shelburne? Don't go to the farms, just is at the gate. You don't even have to go through the gate. All you have to do is go left, right along the road, and there's the best clay plane forest in all of Vermont, with white oak and swamp white oak and bur oak growing in it. This is Abbey Pond in Middlebury. This is a hemlock forest. One of some of the oldest trees in Vermont, simply because it's sheltered and hemlock gets old. This is at the top of East Mountain in East Haven, right next to the Air Force Base. There's a big radar site up there, but right next to it, within an ice throw of the proposed wind turbines, is a beautiful stand of red spruce. And this shows up in the Fragile Areas Registry. If you go across the Wrong Way Bridge in Cambridge, this is before you go across the Wrong Way Bridge, the plans were tipped over, just like the old growth picture was tipped over. There's something about old growth and reversing things. This is a white pine stand next to the cemetery. Actually, the best part of the Cambridge pines are the hemlocks that are not as robust. All the white pines date from the late 1800s, which is very typical of white pine. Who said white pine? They grow in old fields. This is an old field white pine stand. Also, Fisher Canfield pines down in Arlington, Vermont, is an old field white pines. Just very quickly, these are just some numbers. You don't have to look at anything other than 0.7% per year. These are at Lord's Hill, following 716 trees, and in 25 years, 125 of them died, which is 0.7% per year. And you can do really higher math. The reciprocal of 0.7 per year means 143 years for 100%. This is the average survival of trees in an undisturbed stand. The publicity or the guide to the MBR forests says that it has century-old hemlocks, maples, and beeches. Centuries old. In an old-growth forest, in 143 years, there's been 100% turnover.
Why?
Because it's disturbed. They die from various ways. Some die high snap, some low snap, some die with their roots on.
That's a very short period of time, so is it pollution or?
No, it's just the natural process of turning over. People only live 90, 100 years, right? Trees, in the best of conditions, that these are, live about 100.
Why are you talking about 300-year-old maple?
Did I talk about 300-year-old maples?
I don't know, maybe I'm making it up, but
Oh, every single 3-foot diameter maple is at least 300 years old if you ask the owner. No offense. Those maples that are huge are growing in open conditions, so they're growing very rapidly. In fact, my second rule of forestry is you can't tell a tree's age by its size. Because if it's growing very slowly and out of the wind and hunkered down, it really can get to be very old. If it grows very rapidly and has its canopy up there and it gets ripped apart by ice and wind and whatever, it dies. So it's counterintuitive, but don't, these ideas of very old trees. I have another definition of old growth, which I dare anyone to put into effect, which is half the maximum longevity of that species. The maximum documented longevity of sugar maple, of any tree, sugar maple in the East, is about 300 to 350 years. Half of that's 175 or so years. So any sugar maple over 175, and these almost make it, except this is a sugar bush. So if you get in a sheltered area that hasn't been disturbed, you might push this number up to 150 to 170, but you won't push it any higher. Of course, we've only taken about 1,000 ages of trees in the East, so we're really kind of begging the question over what the average age of the tree is if we only have a couple of hundred, and half of them have been in 2 or 3 places. Good study if you want. Give me an age structure of any stand and you have a publishable paper. Okay, this gets into my latest which is historical ecology. This is the Vershire town office. This is the clerk, and these are the original town books, usually the proprietor's book you're looking for, which are the people that owned the town before the settlers. The group of owners in common of the town, usually from Connecticut or New Hampshire, sometimes Massachusetts, that got this town, and their job was to develop it and divide it up into lots. And this is Lebanon, New Hampshire. This was done a long time ago in the 1930s by a geographer who went and looked at the lots in Lebanon, and at the corner of each lot, a tree was used to mark the corner of the lot so that the settler that came in could know where his lot was. You find that information in raw form in the vault. There's Eva from Calais. There's her vault. There is a piece of parchment that has the original lotting map of Calais in it. And here you can take the lots today, put together what the original lots were, 100 acres, 120 acres there, and at the corner of lots here I have extracted off of that map, parchment, see letters, there's M's and S's and whatever around there. There's the piece of parchment. There's the current corner there that had a maple tree, and there's the son of the maple right there. The maple tree right is in the middle of the road because the road was on the lot line, so it wouldn't disturb either of the owners on either side. There's the book. And I've been searching through these. I have now about 150 towns in Vermont. I have enough information on trees in lots, so-called witness trees or corner trees. These are blaze trees on the corner of lots. Sometimes you can tell they're witness trees by the sign. Other times you have a post, and next to the post you have a blaze tree. In the record books that tree will be named. This tree at the northwest corner of the Kennebec Purchase in Maine was marked as a beech tree by Ephraim Ballard. Anyone ever heard of Ephraim Ballard? You might have heard of his wife, Martha Ballard. The Midwife's Tale won the Pulitzer Prize. All right? In the Midwife's Tale, she talks about her husband leaving to go off in the woods and work. This is what he did. He marked trees. This is the current corner of the Kennebec Purchase. You can see the blazed beech tree. It isn't the original beech tree that he marked in 1789. This is the son of the beech, or maybe the grandson of the beech there. This is the only witness tree I know about from colonial times in New England. This is in the Penobscot County Courthouse. There was a timber trespass suit in the 1880s. It revolved around where the town boundary was. The surveyor went and cut the blaze out of the tree to show where the boundary was and entered it as evidence. And it is evidence in the court case, and now it's in a glass case in the deed office. And you can see the blaze that was put there in 1790, that was cut out in 1880, that still exists in 2000. This is the witness tree in the courthouse. There I am back in Calais putting it together. We do have a pre-settlement forest composition from Woodstock between 1773 and 1791, 131 witness trees. This is not the proprietor's book, but it's the town proceedings that records deeds in the early days, and the corner of the lots in those deeds were, oh, wait a minute, who said beech originally? 38% beech in the town of Woodstock. Pretty good sample, by the way, kind of unbiased. Hemlock, 20%. Who said hemlock? Comes in second. Maple, 15%. Who said maple? You said red maple. Okay. Birch, 5%. Basswood. Here we go, Riemann. A 5% Riemann. It shows up regularly in Windsor County surveys. Remin, or R-I-M-M-O-N. It has various spellings because they were semi-illiterate.
What is it?
It's coming up. What?
Astraea virginiana.
Astraea virginiana. A hop hornbeam that goes by various names. One rock maple. We have maples here that were just undistinguished. We have one rock maple and one soft maple, and that's significant that they called it rock maple because they have different vernacular usages of maples, a white ash, and a butternut. So here we have Woodstock. This is MBR. Here's what it looked like with sugar maple and beech, and here's what it originally was beech, hemlock, maple over the whole town. Here's vernacular usage. These are various surveys of, it's up to 1,500 now, of towns throughout the northeastern North America. Here's what they called, there were no sugar maples in Vermont in 1800, none. It was all hard maple. Okay? If you were from Maine, it was rock maple. It's only if you're from New York or Pennsylvania that they called it sugar maple. So show your Vermont roots by around here calling it hard maple. Notice the surveyor that surveyed the lots in Woodstock called it rock maple. He was probably a little from the east, a good Maine. There's the equivalent of what we call, which is now red maple, hardly any red maples in the early surveys, but we have lots of soft maple that corresponds with hard maple. We have a lot of white maple that is the opposite of rock maple. Notice the early Woodstock surveyor had hard and soft, or excuse me, rock and soft, not hard and soft. He was kind of mixed up. I think he was kind of from probably just over the New Hampshire line.
What's soft maple?
These are all the same species. Red maple equals soft maple equals white maple equals Acer rubrum. Okay? But they use different names. And then it gets very complicated. These are the names for ironwood. It can be called here in eastern Vermont leverwood. It can be called ironwood in the west. It can be called hardhack, scattered here and there. It can be called hard beam. It can be called hornbeam. It'd be called water beech and blue beech are different. Those are Carpinus, not Australia, but they're still called ironwoods. It'd be called hazel, or even witch hazel in western Massachusetts and southern Vermont. Or it can be called Riemann, or Rimmen, depending on how you, and that's only in Windsor County, Vermont. That is the local name, that is a local vernacular. Where did you learn?
Because I grew up on a dairy farm here, and I talked with, who's our county forester
Dave?
about the name Riemann.
Yeah.
And he says it's within about a radius of 15 miles. At
Absolutely.
what point, I'm not sure. But he thinks that the name Riemann came from application of a European hardwood to America.
Yeah. The interesting thing is here, we in North America, we have Australia and Carpinus. In Europe, they only have Carpinus, which is sometimes called hazel. Not witch hazel, hazel. And when they came to North America, they didn't have a name for these two different things. They were confused. So where they're confused, they invent their own names. This is gum, which I absolutely love, gum. Gum, the name comes from Pennsylvania. Black gum from the south. Tupelo gum from the near south. Pepperidge from southern New England. That's the Pepperidge Farm. Snagwood from Rhode Island. Swampwood from Cape Cod. Wild pear from New Hampshire and Maine. Beetlewood from southeastern Massachusetts and Windsor County, Vermont. They are using the same name, beetlewood, but I don't think it's for gum. I think beetlewood is probably, they made beetles out of it. You know what a beetle is? Beetle is a mallet that they use to drive pegs into timber frames. They also have what they call pegwood. And I'm convinced beetlewood hits pegwood, and pegwood gets hit by beetlewood, but I'm not sure what the difference is in terms of species. Be that as it may, it's outside the range of gum. See, in Windsor County, gum comes right up about to Westminster, along the river.
And Lake Champlain.
Lake Champlain, Colchester Bog. It gets up into some swamps here in Maine, but it's outside the range. And I would say if you could look throughout your towns around, and see if there's any nyssa. Around here they grow in swamps up on the sides of hills that are poorly drained that have spruce and gum, like Vernon Gum Swamp down in Vernon is a classic spruce gum swamp. And there might be some spruce gum. There might have been some early. I doubt that there was this outlier of gum there. You got to know how to talk like the early settlers to figure out what was here. I put together this map. It's what I call the squinty-eyed view. These are pie diagrams. The greens represent temperate conifers. The reds, northern hardwoods. The blue, northern conifers. The blues, temperate conifers, and the yellows and oranges, hickories, oaks. And you can see the same way that big map showed zones of things. We go through mixed conifer hardwoods, through hardwoods, mixing in hemlock and white pine down at the bottom here, not up here with the hardwoods, and then finally down to oaks and hickories. But this is the actual composition. This is not zones. This is percentage of different species growing in these individual towns. Here's zooming in. Let me see. There we go. That's Woodstock. And you can see dominated by beech with a good deal of hemlock in there. Maples, not as abundant as there are today by any means. And then a mixture of other species. What I really like here is the blank towns. These are towns that, if you can go into the town records, you can get 50 trees off of road surveys, off of deed surveys, off of proprietors' records, off of proceedings, town proceedings and whatever. So I guess it's Pomfret, Royalston, Rochester, what I got, Stockbridge, right there, and then Windsor, West Windsor, Heartland, along the river. You could really expand the database. So if you're interested in what your town's composition is, I'm happy to give it to you. If you live in a town in the white, you have to give me the composition. And here we are, just this is for White River towns: Tunbridge, Stratford, Sharon, Norwich, Barnard, and Hartford. And we come up with 32% on the average beech, 22% hemlock, 20% maple, 9% birch. That should be familiar. That's the same order as the Woodstock. And in fact, this order here are the orders of the dominant species in pre-settlement, nominally 1800. Notice pines only are abundant in Hartford along the river, and much less. Norwich is also along the river, Sharon along the White River, but the interior towns have little, if any, pine. And we have relatively small amounts of spruce. Virtually no oaks. Another thing you can do, the oak army is coming, and to know if we're invaded, we got to know whether the oaks are already here. So where oaks are really worth mapping. iNaturalist out of VCE, Vermont Center for Eco Studies, is mapping oaks. And literally south-facing slopes, if you go up the Pomfret Road, the Pomfret Road, right where the Appalachian Trail crosses, on the right-hand side there's this wonderful hill covered with oaks. South-facing slope coming.
Tons of them.
Yeah, and they're not anywhere else. And the pollen diagram says they've been there for 8,000 years.
I've got them, big ones. That's why I was saying 300. That's why I'm confused about the longevity.
Yeah. Oh, there's one way you can tell the age of a tree, not its size, but cutting it down and counting the rings, or using an increment core and getting in, or letting it blow down. And if you do get an old tree down, save a cookie. Just cut off a piece about 3 inches in diameter, and I have a whole garage just absolutely filled with firewood that after you read it, you can use it for firewood. Okay, just quickly here, you can see that beeches come across northern New England. This is percentage of composition, rising up to 40 to 50% in this area of Vermont, the dominant. Maples are much less abundant, maxing out maybe 20% in some places in Vermont. Oaks are very rare in the north. This dotted line is the conspicuous limit of oaks today, and here it was in 1800. And you can see it almost parallels. Literally, the original version. So the last 200 years, oaks haven't moved. Are they going to move in the next 200 years? We'll find out.
You have a particular oak species, or is it?
In the lead are red oak, and that's in the north. The most indicative indicator of the sprout hardwoods, or the oak zone of that yellow and orange, is white oak. So that's another species that's very indicative. Do you have any white oaks in Woodstock?
Down by White River.
Yeah, down by the river, and they go all the way up the river to Haverhill. Yeah. Also, what is it? Hackberry. You get hackberry down by the river, and it goes all the way up to. Actually, hackberry goes all the way up to St. Johnsbury, but you don't get them on the secondary. The secondary tributaries you tend to get sycamore, possibly some silver maple. But the secondary tributaries of the Connecticut do not have that main stem Connecticut flora. Pines are virtually non-existent in the uplands in the pre-settlement survey. They mostly occur down here in the sandy areas of the Merrimack Valley, the Connecticut Valley, Cape Cod, and those are not white pine, those are pitch pine. The dominant pine in colonial New England was pitch pine, not white pine. White pine did occur here and there, but certainly not in the abundance that we see it today. Spruces you expect north, and again, the dominant range here, and look at the spruces down in southeastern Massachusetts. Those are cranberry bogs today, and originally were spruce gum swamps. Nothing left there. Chestnut barely got into Vermont, just in the Connecticut Valley and along the Taconics. Wasn't there. But there were areas in the Merrimack Valley and in Berkshire County, Massachusetts, where chestnut got beyond the range that's recognized by the American Chestnut Foundation. They don't know the range of chestnut because it's been so disrupted, both by extirpation and by planting of chestnuts, and the active management where they're now planting out resistant chestnuts all over the place, including in Thetford. There's a major outplanting site of chestnuts. Hickories, just about the same. The range follows the original. These southern species, oaks, chestnut, and hickories, aren't moving. And you can see that here. Here's, actually this is a cluster diagram. It's the same as those species, except what I've done is I've mathematically waved my arms and put towns that have similar composition in the same color. So you have northern towns, hardwood towns, sprout hardwood towns. And there's this line. This is the line between the sprout hardwoods, central hardwoods, and the northern hardwoods. This is Illusi Brown's tension line going through there. And this is the current ecological classification, which has exactly the same pattern there. This is a map from 1800, and this is a map from 2000. 200 years, the line hasn't moved. It might say something about climate change. Might not. This has been expanded further. There's clusters from all the way through Pennsylvania and New York. There's the tension line. It continues on, it goes up the Hudson. This is the Oak Salient into the Genesee Valley through the Chemung. This is the Allegheny, and then it keeps on going all the way across Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. It's Curtis's tension line between southern species of forest and northern species of forest. Not the prairie boundary, between oak and beech. And we're going to have a few here. This is from Paleon. We've looked at oak abundance. Blue is very little oak. Red is a lot of oak. And you can see here that going from 1800 to 2000, back to 1800, up to 2000. If you look here in the oak salient, 1800, the oak salient was there. 2000, it's still there. You can see that oaks were very abundant on the prairie boundary, and all we have today are beans and corn. Have very little trees. You can see here the boundary in New England early on, just there in southeastern New Hampshire, southern Maine. Today, southeastern New Hampshire, southern Maine. Champlain just barely shows up. Currently there. This is, it looks a lot better in the hologram. We have one image, and you tilt it and it flips from 1800 to 2000, so you can see the difference. We have the same type of information for spruce. This is the distribution of spruce in 1800. And you see it fits almost exactly with the distribution of oak. That's the boundary of the northern forests with an indicator spruce, and the southern forests with an indicator of oak. I'm expanding. This is just bragging about. I've showed you this before, but I've got new data. See here in the Ottawa Valley and the eastern townships and the Gaspé. And actually the Ottawa Valley is looking a lot like the Champlain Valley. Even though it's in Canada and you think it's north, it has a temperate transitional feel to it. Just quickly here on structure, we've been through the species, we've been through the composition, we've been through distribution, but this is just looking at The total amount of forest cover, these are real numbers, by the way, from 1880 from the census records, 1770 from the early surveys, and 1997 from the FIA, Forest Inventory and Analysis. Forest cover was 98%, it went down to 30%, it's back up to 82% in the county. However, that 52% bounce back from 1800 to 2000 is due to several different types of forest. Forest that's regrown on pasture, forest that's regrown on tilled land, and forest that's regrown on cut land. So you have the forest that's come back, the 52%, which is the dominant, is at least 3 types of forests with different compositions. If it comes back on tilled land, it tends to be white pine. If it comes back on pasture land, if it isn't grazed, it comes back to hardwoods. If it is grazed, it comes back to conifers like red cedar. If it's hardwoods, just woods and cut over, it can tend to come back to hardwoods again. But notice the original forest had a lot of spruce in it, and it doesn't come back to that. This is the change of composition. This is my last series. These are 6 towns in Windsor County, and the percentage in 1800. This is the FIA, the percentage in 1997, and this is the ratio. The species here are at the low end of the ratio, which means that current composition is very much underrepresented what it originally was. And at this end is very high current composition of aspens, cherries, hickories, basswood, and ashes and pines is up to 3 times what it was originally. These are things that come in with human disturbance, things that come in after settlement. And these are the things that go away: butternut, buttonwood. That's probably why we don't have any sycamores around. Elms for a variety of reasons, and beech, which was the dominant, and hemlock there. So, that's just all of Vermont. We have the original forest. We have various lines of evidence. We have what the modern is. This is MBR, maples. We can look at paleoecology, what the history of forests were. We can look at climax theory, hemlock, white pine, northern hardwoods around here. We can read about it in the book and see what the theory says. We can look at remnants. This is Gifford Woods. Or we can look at empirical surveys. And they all give a slightly different, some more detailed in the big picture scale, some more specific to individual spots. The southeast corner of Woodstock. It was a beech forest. What is it today? I don't know, but you could find out. Easy as pie. All you'd have to do is go there. 4 miles north on the eastern boundary of Woodstock. Find a tree that is really weird. I can tell you it's going to be a beetlewood tree. My best guess it's Australia. I don't know. The surveyor that did that was working in Windsor County, but he's the first one to work in Windsor County. So I don't think he knew what Riemann was at the time that he surveyed it. Okie-doke. I'll be happy to entertain any questions. I'm always around. I always like to blither on about woods. I love to get into the field and see what's there, and I'd love to hear what you see if you get into the field, and see if it's consistent with these various pictures. I've given you enough possibilities that the forest originally was maple, pine, beech, hemlock, birch, and maybe to the south a bit of oak. Thank you.